She married a human for peace, then discovered why the galaxy feared Earth. The three men were already inside our corridor when I heard the first blast. I was not sleeping. Sorathi do not sleep the way humans do, not in long, unbroken stretches. I rest in intervals, aware of the world around me even in stillness. So when the outer hatch seal cracked and the pressure in the passage shifted by 0.04 of a unit, I was already sitting up, already reaching for the sidearm I kept under my reading table. The sidearm was gone. I stared at the empty space for exactly 1 second before I understood. Someone had known where to look. Someone had been in these quarters before tonight. I moved to the door. The corridor light was dead. 3 figures moved through the dark in formation, the kind of formation that belongs to soldiers, not thieves. I recognized the shoulder markings even before my eyes adjusted. Sorathi, my own people. The blast that had broken the hatch had also cracked 2 of my ribs. I had not noticed until that moment, when I took a breath and felt the sharp wrongness of it. Behind me, the bedroom was empty. My husband was gone. I had been married to Daniel Reyes for 11 months, and I had spent most of those months deciding how little he mattered. He was human, short-lived, soft, born on a planet that had only discovered faster-than-light travel 300 years ago. I was a Sorathi ambassador, from a civilization that had watched stars form and die. The marriage was a political arrangement, demanded by the Galactic Mediation Council as a condition of the peace treaty that kept my people alive. It was not a union of hearts. It was a transfer of humiliation. That was what I had told myself. But now he was gone, and 3 armed men were moving toward my position, and I had no weapon, and I thought, he has run. The one thing humans are truly good at, I thought, is surviving. He has run and left me here. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to think. The first man came through the doorway fast, the way people do when they expect resistance. He did not find any from me. He found Daniel. I did not see it happen so much as hear it. A sharp, controlled sound, the kind that happens when a joint is redirected faster than it wants to go. Then a second sound, which was the man's equipment case hitting the floor. Then nothing, because the man was already unconscious. The second and third moved together, which is what trained soldiers do. It did not help them. I heard 4 seconds of movement in the dark and then silence. Then a light came on. A small one, the handheld kind Daniel kept in his jacket pocket because, as he had once told me with no drama whatsoever, he liked to know where he was going. He was crouching over the third man, pressing a folded cloth against a cut on the man's forearm. The other 2 were on the floor nearby, breathing, which was more than they had earned. Daniel looked up at me. His hands were steady. His face was calm. "Are you hurt?" he said. My ribs were cracked. There was a ringing in my left ear from the blast. I had been standing in the dark 30 seconds ago preparing to die, and my husband had just neutralized 3 trained Sorathi soldiers alone, in the dark, without a weapon, and his first words were to ask about me. I said, "I am fine." He nodded and went back to the man's arm. I stood there and looked at him, and felt something shift in my understanding of the universe, and it was not small, and it was not comfortable. Let me tell you how I came to be on that station. The war between the Sorathi hegemony and the Keth Empire had lasted 19 years by the time I was sent to the Mediation Council. We were losing, not quickly, not dramatically, but the slow grinding way that ends civilizations. The Keth had better numbers, better manufacturing, and an absolute indifference to casualties that our people had never been able to match. The Council's solution surprised everyone. They did not propose a military alliance or a weapons transfer. They proposed a marriage, to a human. The reasoning, delivered to us in the Council's infuriatingly neutral tone, was this. The Keth Empire would not attack the Terran Compact, had not in fact come within 4 light-years of Terran space in 200 years, despite the fact that humans were relatively new to the galaxy and had no technology the Keth could not match. The avoidance was not strategic. It was something else. If Sorathi and human interests became formally and personally linked, the Keth would extend that avoidance to us. I was chosen. I accepted because I had no choice, and because I believed I was strong enough to endure it. The human they sent was named Daniel Reyes. He was 41 years old, which is middle-aged for them, with dark hair starting to go gray at the edges, and a beard he kept trimmed but not carefully. He had been a soldier. He was not one anymore. He wore a jacket that had a small patch on the sleeve, a flag, old and faded, the kind of thing humans carry from the part of their life they do not talk about in detail. He held out his hand at the signing ceremony. I did not take it. He smiled anyway. I spent the first month categorizing everything that was wrong with him. He required sleep, long and apparently non-negotiable. He ate at specific times and found comfort in the ritual of preparing food, which I found baffling. He drank something called coffee every morning, 2 cups, and if he did not have it, he became quiet in a way that was different from his normal quiet. He was always quiet. That was the first thing I noticed that I could not fully dismiss. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, but the quiet of someone who had decided that most situations did not require noise. He asked me, in the second week, what I liked to eat. I told him, expecting him to forget. He did not forget. He asked the station supply system the next day and had it stocked. I told myself it was simple behavioral conditioning. He was performing attentiveness because it was expected. But he never told anyone he had done it. There was no audience. He just did it and said nothing, and the food was there. The first time I genuinely could not dismiss him was 3 months in. He told me about his dog. He did not offer the story dramatically. We were sitting in the common room after dinner, and I had asked, without much interest, what he had done in his military service. He told me a few things, sparse and factual, the way he told most things. And then he mentioned the dog. Her name was Rue. She had been trained to detect concealed materials, but she had also, according to Daniel, been excellent at knowing when a person needed to sit down and not be alone. She had died on his last deployment. An accident, not enemy action, which he said as though that distinction mattered to him, and somehow it did, to me too. He told the whole story with his hands still in his lap, no gestures, his voice the same level it always was, and when he finished he said, "She was good," and that was all. I did not cry. Sarathi do not cry, exactly. But something happened with my eyes that I chose not to examine. I asked him why humans bonded with creatures who would die long before them. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Because the time you have is the time you have." I spent 3 days thinking about that sentence and not arriving anywhere comfortable. 4 months in, a Keth scout vessel entered restricted Sarathi space near the Aldith border. It was a clear provocation, the kind designed to test whether the new treaty had actually changed anything. I began drafting a formal protest, a process that in Sarathi diplomacy involves 14 distinct steps and several committees. Daniel made one call. I do not know what was said. He was in the next room and I heard almost nothing, just the low measured sound of his voice, and then silence. The Keth vessel withdrew within the hour. There was an apology attached. An apology, from the Keth. I asked him what he said. He shrugged. Old understanding. That night I accessed the Galactic Historical Archive for the first time with specific intent. I was looking for the origin of what the Keth called in their military documents, the Protocol of Meera. I had seen the name referenced twice in intelligence materials and dismissed it as internal Keth bureaucracy. It was not. Meera was the name of a human colony. A small one, agricultural, unremarkable. 212 years ago, a spacefaring civilization called the Vethka had destroyed it. Completely. They had done so to test a new weapon, and because the colony was small enough that they had calculated the response would not be significant. They had calculated wrong. What followed is described in the archive in careful neutral language that did not fully conceal what had actually happened. Humanity had responded. Not with a single retaliatory strike, not with a strongly worded message to the Galactic Council. They had responded with a campaign that was organized, funded, and prosecuted with the kind of patience that most species save for geological processes. The Vethka surrendered 12 years in. Humanity continued for 28 more years. Not to punish. The archive was careful to note this. Humanity continued because they were ensuring that the specific capability that had destroyed Meera was gone, entirely, at its root, in a way that could never be rebuilt. When they finally stopped, they stopped completely and immediately, and withdrew all forces and never expanded 1 centimeter into the space where the Vethka had been. They still bring materials to the memorial site at Meera every year. Food, mostly, because the colonists had been farmers. The Vethka no longer exist as a civilization. I closed the archive file and sat in the dark for a very long time. I looked at Daniel sleeping in the next room. He looked completely ordinary, medium height, the gray at his temples, the old jacket hanging on the chair beside the bed because he liked to know where it was when he woke up. That was the detail that stayed with me, that he liked to know where things were, quietly, without fuss, without telling anyone. He had simply, at some point, learned the full layout of our station. I know this because I tested it once, changed a route on my way back from the council room, and he arrived from the correct direction without breaking stride. He had memorized it, out of habit. The men who had come to kill me that night were from a Sarathi separatist group who believed the peace treaty was a surrender, and that ending it violently was preferable to accepting human association. They had planned well. They had known about my sidearm. They had cut the corridor lights. They had come 3 at a time. Daniel had been in the kitchen when the hatch blew. He was making coffee, his second cup, at an hour when most people would have been asleep. He heard the pressure change, the same way I had, and he moved toward it instead of away. He did not pick up a weapon because there was no time to get one. He used the dark, which he knew, and the layout of the corridor, which he had memorized months ago without explanation, and the fact that the 3 men had trained together, and therefore moved in patterns that, once read, could be used against them. 90 seconds, I counted later from the station log. And then he was on the floor pressing cloth against the arm of the man who had come to kill me, because the man was injured and Daniel was the kind of person who addressed the nearest problem first. I had married him because my people needed a shield. I had not understood that the shield was not the treaty. The treaty was just paper. The shield was him. Not because he was exceptional among humans, but because he was, from everything I had seen, fairly ordinary among humans. He was simply what they were, underneath the soft voices and the coffee rituals and the small flags on old jackets. Capable. Quietly, completely, terrifyingly capable, and wholly uninterested in demonstrating it unless something left him no other choice. After the security team arrived and took the 3 men away, I sat on the edge of the common room table and watched Daniel wash his hands at the kitchen sink. He was unhurried. The water ran for a while. He dried his hands on a cloth and then put the cloth in the laundry because he was the kind of person who did not leave things undone. I said, "You memorized the station." "Yes," he said. "You never mentioned it." "No." "Why?" He thought about it. Not the long dramatic pause of someone constructing a performance, but the actual pause of someone who was being honest and wanted to get the wording right. "I don't mention most things," he said. "I just do them." I wanted to ask him how long he had been that way. Whether the military had made him like that or whether he had come to it naturally. Whether he had always been the kind of man who walked into danger in the dark without a weapon and came out the other side with steady hands. Instead, I said, "My ribs are cracked." He turned from the sink immediately. "Which side?" "Left, 2, possibly 3. He crossed the room, asked permission before he touched me, and assessed the injury with the same focused quiet he applied to everything. He had a medical kit. Of course he had a medical kit. It was under the bed, he told me, as he went to get it, just in case. While he worked, I told him that the Sarathi Council had sent me a recall option. The marriage had served its diplomatic function. I could return home with my status intact and my obligation fulfilled. He did not react to that. He kept his attention on what he was doing. I watched his face carefully and found nothing there that looked like relief or hurt, just the same focused calm. "What would you do?" I said. "If I left?" "Get a dog, probably," he said. I looked at him. "I've been thinking about it for a while," he said. "There's a program on station, rescue animals. Haven't done it yet because you're allergic to most of the fur types. But there was one last week, short-haired, that might have worked." I didn't want to bring it up without asking. He had been considering my comfort in a decision about his own household for months and had said nothing. He had just waited, quietly, for the right time. I said, "I would like to meet the dog." He looked up. Something passed through his expression that was not quite a smile but was related to one. "Okay," he said. I filed my response to the council the next morning. 1 paragraph, diplomatic and complete, stating that the integration was proceeding well and that I was choosing to remain. I recommended no interference. I did not explain further. What I understood by then could not have been explained in diplomatic language anyway. It was not that humans were invincible. They were not. It was not that they were violent by nature. They were, in fact, one of the more restrained species I had encountered once you understood that restraint was a choice they were actively making. The restraint was the point. It was the most frightening thing about them. A creature that cannot hurt you is harmless. A creature that can hurt you very badly and simply chooses not to, every single day, because it has decided you are worth more whole than broken. That creature is something else entirely. That is the creature you do not cross, because you know, with absolute certainty, that the choice can change. The Keth knew this. Every senior species knew this. The protocol of Meera existed not as a threat but as a reminder, one that got updated every generation so no one would be tempted to forget. Do not mistake the stillness for absence. Do not mistake the quiet for weakness. Do not mistake the coffee and the dogs and the morning routines for the whole picture. The picture includes what happened to Meera. Daniel came into the room while I was finishing my report. He set a cup of tea beside my hand, the kind I preferred, which he had learned without being told. He sat down across from me with his own cup and looked out the observation window at the stars for a while. I watched him and thought about the 11 months behind us. The way he had never once pushed me to be comfortable with him. The way he had simply continued to be what he was, steadily, without performance, until I had run out of reasons not to look at him honestly. He had offered me his hand at the signing ceremony, and I had refused it. I thought about that hand, about what it had done in the corridor the night before, about the fact that he had offered it to me first, gently, openly, expecting nothing, before I had given him any reason for kindness at all. That was what the galaxy had always misunderstood. It was not the capability that made humans what they were. Capability alone was just a weapon. It was the choice, made continuously and quietly and without fanfare, to reach toward things rather than away from them, even knowing the reaching might be refused. The danger and the decency, together, inseparable, not one hiding the other, both real, both fully present in the same hands. I reached across the table and set my hand on his. He did not make anything of it. He just turned his hand over and held mine, and we both looked at the stars, and nothing more needed to be said. I have served the Sarathi hegemony for 40 years. I have negotiated treaties with 9 civilizations and witnessed the collapse of 2 others. I am not, by any reasonable definition, an easy person to surprise. He surprised me. He continues to. I find, increasingly, that I do not mind.